Okay. I'd like to call to order the meeting of the Tompkins County Industrial Development Agency for Wednesday, February 12th, 2025. Welcome to everybody. I've got a couple announcements I need to read into the record. The first one is Board Member Duxon Nguyen will be attending the February 12th, 2025 meeting via video conference due to an extraordinary circumstance as outlined in Section 4E of the organization's public meeting video conference policy. This determination was made by IDA Chair Rich John. Mr. Nguyen will be attending at a location that is not open to the public and thus will not count towards quorum, but will be able to vote on any motions on the floor. And then we also have a member, Jerry Dietz, who is attending, who does not come under the policy for extraordinary circumstances, and he'll be able to participate in the discussion but cannot vote and does not count towards quorum. So welcome to you both. Thanks for joining us virtually. All right, and then first item of business is privilege of the floor. I have one blue sheet. If there's anybody else who wishes to address the IDA, the sheets are over on the table there, and please fill one out and hand it up. But in the meantime, Teresa Alt.
I'm Teresa Alt, 206 Eddy Street, City of Ithaca. I am not addressing any specific item up for a vote today, but rather making a general observation or two. We often hear about how wonderful the Tompkins County Community Development Housing Fund is, and how wonderful it is that luxury housing developments that get tax abatements pay in lieu fees to it. But those fees are way too small to actually build low-rent housing. The fund can only make symbolic contributions to projects that will mainly be privately financed and owned, with government subsidy coming from the state in the form of low-income housing tax credits. The biggest problem here is that rents only have to remain low for 30 years, and after that, the owners can raise them at will. Last month, somebody suggested that the IDA survey what rental housing really was needed here. That's a good idea. They said that the county's Danter study is now nearly 10 years old. Let me add that that study never was designed to study needs, only to study what developers would want to invest in. I recall sitting in its public presentation and a friend and I looking at each other with jaws dropped when we heard this.
Thank you. Okay. Is there anybody else who wishes to address the IDA or the Development Corporation? Okay, seeing none, we'll proceed to business, or actually first, any additions to the agenda? I do have some things on Chair's report, but I'll raise those then. Seeing none, we can proceed to business. First item is the 2025 officer and committee appointments. And I don't know if you all have the list in front of you, but first I'd start out by saying thank you to all the members for agreeing to serve on the various committees in various capacities. And for the public attending, we have a governance committee and a finance and audit committee. And then we have two ad hoc committees, the housing committee and the construction labor committee. And my sense is that both will be called into play and active this year, because I'm of the view that we do need to really rethink our housing policy and maybe take some steps there. And we've had some direct questions about our labor policy, local labor policy, where I think it would be really good to have our construction labor committee active and looking at those issues. So I think all of the committees will be meeting this year and doing important work. Any questions or comments on the appointments? All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Okay. I can read them off should I read them or put them in the record, or can we just put the list in the record?
We can put the list in the record, and then we
just in the interest of time.
Motion to approve.
Yeah. All right. Deborah moves. Greg seconds. Questions, comments, discussion? Ready to vote. I'm going to call Duxon.
Aye.
Deborah.
Yes.
Jeff.
Yes.
Greg.
Yes.
Todd. And the chair votes yes. All right. Great. Let's proceed to the second item of business, the Asteria parking application. And you have it in your packet, and I believe there was some amendment to it. And Kelly, do you want to
Yes.
discuss
so
that?
In your packet, there is the amended application with the retail determination, authorizing resolution, and notice that the public hearing was held on January 30th, and we had one comment in support that was submitted.
Okay. And I note that we have a project authorizing resolution that's revised here.
Yes. Because of the retail determination being added.
Okay. So if I could get a motion to move the amended project authorizing resolution onto the floor. Todd moves, Jeff seconds. All right. And maybe you just want to speak to the retail determination, what was done there.
Yes, so because of the specificity of the project and the location, Cinemapolis offering something that is very specific and unique, adding benefit to the community, it was determined and approved that it did provide benefit to the community. And we will have the mayor sign the letter of retail determination tomorrow. And that's fine.
So if a project is more than 30% retail, which Cinemapolis is, under state regulations, the IDA does need to make a determination. That's what we're calling that retail determination. They need to make a determination that they're providing a benefit or service that's not readily available in the city of Ithaca. So that's what that is.
And this sure isn't.
And then the city needs to concur that that's the case. So I know Kelly has talked to the mayor, and they're perfectly happy to do that.
And the purpose of that is so that we're not advantaging one business over another. Good citizen. They certainly contribute to our community in lots of different ways. So I'm very happy to vote yes on this resolution. But I'd give anybody else a chance to speak. Seeing none? Okay. Are we ready to vote? Duxon.
Yes.
Deborah.
Yes.
Jeff.
Yes.
Greg.
Yes.
Todd.
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. And Jerry, even though you can't vote, did you have anything you wanted to add there?
No, Rich, thanks. I think you said it very well. Cinemapolis clearly is a real asset to downtown, so I'm glad we're doing this. Thank you.
Okay. All right, next item is lit thinking application. And we're on page 30, I believe, of the agenda. We have the community benefit memo. Kelly or Heather, do you want to introduce this?
And with us today, we have Rob Martinowski from Lit Thinking. You can come up and join us. So this project, Lit
Yeah, please
Thinking-
come up. You can sit
Right up here. Lit Thinking is a private technology firm which was founded in 2022, and their main focus is on utilizing ultraviolet C technology, radiation, to mitigate the risk of infection from airborne pathogens. They are opening an R&D facility at 10 Brown Road in the Cornell Business and Tech Park, and requesting a sales tax benefit of $98,000 to assist with the renovation and fit out of their space. This is a benefit that's under $100,000, so this can be approved without a public hearing. That being said, I'll turn it over to Rob for some additional information on the project.
Yeah, thank you for that. I am the head of operations for Lit Thinking. We are a company that was founded in 2022 with a goal of commercializing a device that could provide UVC 222 as a wavelength to help inactivate pathogens in an occupied space. What that means is you can be in the space for 24 hours with the device being on, and there's no damage to the skin or eyes or to the person. But there is damage to the pathogens. It inactivates the pathogens. It doesn't actually kill them, but it disables them so they cannot reproduce. And what that basically means is that's the end of life for that infection risk, as a pathogen has to be able to reproduce in order to infect or reinfect. We used a different source for the UVC initially. It's a krypton chloride. It's a module about so big, and it works quite well, but it is expensive, and the design itself is quite expensive. And we quickly realized that in order for this to become ubiquitous, to be able to be used in public spaces all over the United States and all over the world, that we have to bring the cost down. And the one target path is to develop a semiconductor version of the UVC emission, an LED, in other words, in order to make the device smaller and to get past some of the power requirements that we have with the larger module. So what we're going to do here is we're bringing in what they call an MOCVD reactor. And what that reactor does, it takes a wafer base. We use an aluminum nitride wafer, and then it literally builds the layers required to create an LED. And from that LED, then we'll tune it to emit the proper wavelength to produce the UVC 222. This is a project that takes 3 to 5 years to complete. We've got a 5-year lease right now with options, of course, to continue that if necessary. We will have a staff that begins with 2 people. One of them is moving from Orlando, Florida to Ithaca. He's already been here to look for housing. And the other gentleman is Leo Showalter. He's our CTO. He actually lives in New York, and it's about a 2 or 3 hour drive for him. So he is going to be at this location full time as well. This year we plan on hiring 4 new hires. The 4 new hires will be 1 or 2 scientists and engineers in order to run this operation. We've already got I was at the space today. We're reviewing it for the demolition plan to get it prepared to move the equipment in. The initial equipment investment's over $2 million. And then there's more to come behind that. We've got expenditures that we need to do gas lines, ventilation, electrical, and all the things you would expect to go along with this type of an operation. And those will all be using local sources to get done. So we're technically we're going to be here, and we're asking the council for some assistance to abate some costs during our push this year to get the operation up and running, and this would help us greatly.
Okay. Jeff.
Thanks very much. So what brought you to Ithaca? I mean, obviously, I read in the document here, obviously, you're going to be working with the Cornell Nanoscale facility for the fabrication techniques. Was it specific to that, or was there other competitors around the country, and then Cornell was the best fit for you?
Great question. So Cornell has a unique understanding of the technology that we're dealing with. We actually did look at another location. We were thinking about staying in Florida. And it was really hard to get the folks down there to wrap their head around what we were doing, the importance of what we were doing, and to figure out a way of how they could help us with space and technology assistance in order to get it done. It's really hard to buy all this equipment yourself. It's very, very expensive. And what we were able to do with the Cornell folks is do like a sharing of the technologies that we're using. They've got things that we can use, and we have things that they can use in order to further development of this UVC technology. Our CTO, Dr. Showalter, actually has taught at Cornell, and he's got a lot of great contacts there in this department that are helping us with this. And honestly, they have been one of the great forces on getting us through the process with the technology park. because there's a lot of difficulties out there right now with this financial state of the Cornell Business and Technology Park that were a little bit difficult to overcome, but we got past all that. And they're very supportive, and they've helped us with contacting us with folks that they've used to get the site up and running, and it has made this thing go. We did almost 2.5 years in Florida with 0 results, and we've been working on it about 8 months with the Cornell folks, and we're ready to go. So it's been very beneficial for us. It's going to be very beneficial for them. And then we're able to tap into the intern resource, graduate student interns, and they in turn are able to learn from us and use that to further the program that they have here at Cornell.
Great,
So
thanks.
it really was a great fit, far better than I expected.
Great.
I'd say thank you for betting on Tompkins County. This is really exciting. Are there any other representatives from LIT here with us today?
No, there are not, and it's a difficult time right now. We're going in about 10 different directions trying to get this up and running. And I happened to be the guy who was available, but I was coming up anyway to look at the site, so I told them I would come on their behalf, but they would have been here if the opportunity arose.
Deborah.
Yeah, thank you. We certainly appreciate your willingness to bet on Tompkins County. I was curious to know if there's any possibility that there would be more jobs added at some point in the future?
Absolutely. Yeah, this year, probably max out at 4 new positions in addition to the 2 that we have. And I think it was a total of 9.
Right.
Total over the 3-year period that we're looking at. These are purely R&D type positions.
I was wondering about your manufacturing going forward.
Yeah, if we get to the point where we have gotten the device to be efficacious and cost effective, then absolutely. Then we turn to the commercialization process where we start to make the device in mass, and then we start talking about manufacturing, what I would call manufacturing. We're going to make them, but we're going to make small batch quantities for testing. If we get to that point, then obviously we're going to have to buy more machines, and we're going to have more people and a lot more space. And I don't think that's a challenge here at all. I mean, the park out there has got lots of buildings, and the last time I drove through it, there's a lot of available space out there. So if we want to grow, we can grow. My background, I've got some experience in the LED industry. And if everybody remembers when LED lights first came out, right? That was like 2010, 2011, when they first were commercialized. I worked for a company called Lighting Science. And at the time, Lighting Science was the first commercial company in the United States to make commercial LEDs for sale in retail store. And Home Depot happened to be that retail store. When that industry started, a bulb cost $40, a single bulb. I was there 4 years. When I left, it cost $4. That's how fast it moves once that technology is achieved. All they start doing is they start refining it, making it better, more powerful, more efficacious, correcting it so it's fine-tuned to the right wavelength. The same thing is going to happen here. Once that breakthrough is made, it just takes off. And then it becomes a really big deal. And that's when we go to manufacturing.
Thank you.
Okay.
Todd.
I'd like to repeat what everyone said too about, I'm glad to hear in Tompkins County, you chose Tompkins County. I'm excited about this too. It looks like just the potential, what this can do. I mean, you think of all the schools, all the airports, hospital. I mean, it's just amazing. I mean, you think about all the things that can come from this.
Yeah, definitely. We have an installation at Mount Sinai Hospital. We've got an installation actually at a daycare facility. We've got an installation at a dental college. And these are not trials, they're purchased installations, but they're for the purpose of monitoring to see what the result and ROI is for a product like this. One of the locations that we're looking at, one of the applications, is for anything that has patients with risk. Patients with high risks get secondary infections, and a lot of times they get it from going to the doctor, going to the hospital, going to a clinic. That's where we think we can be most effective. Will it wipe out 100% of everything? Absolutely not. But just think if it mitigated 40 to 50% of those secondary infections, the cost savings and the life savings and the health savings is just astronomical. And that's our goal.
Great, awesome, thank you.
You bet.
Greg?
Thanks, Rich. Thanks for being here today. One of the questions I have is, as I'll use the LED light bulb example. Once that breakthrough in the technology is there to produce your product at scale, do you foresee a need to remain in Tompkins County, connected to Cornell, or is the thought to manufacture this and then R&D goes where manufacturing goes? It's a 3-year lease, you know, understanding it's new and it's starting down that path, but do you see a long-term commitment to this area, or do you foresee a need to pick up and go somewhere else once that breakthrough happens with Cornell?
The commitment is to keep this manufacturing in the United States always. Dr. Showalter worked on a DARPA grant with Cornell University for the sole purpose of furthering the chip technology and getting this produced in the U.S. If we're successful here, absolutely, our commitment is to stay in this area. All the resources are here, all the people that we're going to work with are here. And what we found, amazingly enough, is a lot of the contractors and the people that we're going to work with for piping, for electrical, for ventilation, all have experience with this kind of technology and what needs to be done to get it up and running. And it would be silly to try to pick up and go somewhere else. The fear is always, right, you're going to take it overseas. Once you get it to a point where it's worth it, you can make it cheaper elsewhere. Our goal is to keep it in the United States and make the value enough to keep it here and produce them in the United States. And we have no plan beyond, it's actually a 5-year lease, no plan beyond that 5 years to go anywhere else but here.
Great, thank you.
You bet.
Heather?
And at the point where they're ready to grow into additional space or into a new building, that's where Kelly and I will come in on the IAED side and help to deliver likely state incentives to, even if they're looking at other locations, make the case that, you know, financially it makes the best sense to stay here.
Yeah, and keep in mind that our lease has a 5-year, or has an option.
Yeah.
Any available contiguous space to where we're at, we get first option on the lease if somebody else tries to come in and lease it out. So, yeah, we plan on growing, and we've already put a contingency in the lease to do that.
Yeah. And certainly I would add that we'd want you to come back and talk with us, you know, in the happy event that you need to grow.
Good. I hope I can do that.
Okay. Any further questions, comments? Anybody on screen? No? Okay. We do have a procedural item just to make sure about, is that the request here is below the threshold where we would need to hold a public hearing. We still could hold a public hearing. I don't think it's called for in this circumstance, but I just put it on the table so that we all understand what we'd be doing. I think we're ready to vote today. Certainly nobody came from the public to voice any objection, and I don't see that there to be a basis for an objection here. It's a pretty limited ask. It's targeted towards helping them in buying local. So I feel comfortable proceeding today, but I want to make sure the rest of you are as well. And Duxon, I see your hand.
Yeah, I'm ready to vote today. I think this is exactly the type of project that the IDA should support, brings jobs, innovation, private university cooperation, and just in general, I think Mr. Marinowski did a great job of describing what the company does and what their plans are. So I am supportive and ready to do so today.
Yeah. Deborah, did you have something, or are you nodding?
I'm just nodding.
Okay.
I agree too.
Everybody? Okay. Greg?
Yeah, I agree on that. I know that our speaker here had said a 5-year lease in the application packet on the first page. It does say a 3-year term. I just want to make sure if there's any conflicting information that's either reflective in the application or wherever, so.
I think the application was set up for a 3-year show, as far as the data that we provided. But it's definitely a 5-year commitment.
Okay.
Okay.
Great. Just wanted that to be noted.
Well, so we do not need to vote on that, but that allows us to put the project authorizing resolution on the table. Could I get a, Jeff moves, Todd seconds. Further discussion? Are we ready to vote? I'll call Duxon.
Yes.
Deborah.
Yes.
Jeff.
Yes.
Greg.
Yes.
Todd.
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. So, great. Thanks for coming in. Good luck. Keep us informed as things move along. This is exciting.
Definitely. Thank you very much. Thanks for your time.
Okay.
Thank you.
The next item of business is the 2024 Board Self-Evaluation Summary Review, and I believe that's on page 48. And I wanted to make sure we just spend a little bit of time talking about this, because this is something New York State requires us to do, and it's part of, I believe, the Paris process of the information we need to turn into New York State. And this is based on the responses provided by all of you and myself. And I note that we seem to be fairly confident that things are going the way we want them to go. That agree or somewhat agree was the answer to almost all of the questions. And there were 3 responses that said somewhat disagree, and then no disagrees. I thought it might make sense for us to just think a little bit about the ones where there was some disagreement or somewhat disagree, to see if there's any way we could improve or do better. So the first one is the board meets to review and approve all documents and reports prior to public release and is confident that the information being presented is accurate and complete. And 5 people said agree, 1 said somewhat agree, and 1 said somewhat disagree. Is there anything specific we could think about doing differently to make sure we are doing this? Anybody have any thoughts? Okay.
Well, Rich, I think I just had a little clarification here, because when it says the board meets to review and approve all documents and reports prior to public release, so when we send out the agenda, that's I'm assuming that's a public release. So we don't necessarily meet before that, which I don't think we should anyway, because it's, you certainly meet with the admin staff to do that. So, this one was a little confusing to me in terms of the question. But
I think you might be right. Okay.
I mean, I felt like I didn't have any issues with how we proceed or how we meet beforehand to approve the agenda and the documents that are then going out. And in terms of the documents that the public has received, I don't see any issues that we have.
Okay. Makes sense. All right. The next one is the board knows the statutory obligations of the authority and if the authority is in compliance with state law. And, we certainly take a lot of steps to try to answer that question, but there was a little uncertainty there. But we have our policies that are in accordance with state law. Our attorneys reviewed all those policies and we update them periodically as needed. We also undergo an annual audit to review what we've done. We also have New York State doing the Paris audit. So, and we have the public looking at us. So I think we're pretty reviewed on whether we're acting in accordance with our statutory obligations. But if anybody has any thoughts on how we could do better. Deborah.
I think staff certainly keeps us apprised of
Yes.
how we're meeting our obligations under state law. I would only say that if somebody feels that that they're not familiar with their statutory obligations, then perhaps they should reach out to staff and ask for some guidance.
Okay. And again, there were 5 agrees, 1 somewhat agree, and 1 somewhat disagree. So I want to make sure we talk about these things. And the last one is, and this is among, I'd say there's about 15 items here. So there were only 3 where there was any disagreement, but board members have sufficient opportunity to research, discuss, question, and prepare before decisions are made and votes taken. And again, it was 5, 1, and 1. And you know, this one particularly falls to me if I'm not giving people enough time. I feel like we do have enough time to consider questions, but if I'm pushing too hard in some area, I'd sure like you guys to tell me, is all. But, yeah.
This is where I would encourage, you know, we give out the agenda package roughly a week in advance. We as board members should do our homework in advance. And then I would certainly encourage anyone to call Heather or Kelly to ask questions. I know I've done that in the past, and you've certainly walked me through the woods a number of times, and I appreciate that. So I feel like as board members, we should be willing to do that and be prepared to come into the meeting.
Yeah, and by raising these 3, I don't want to dismiss that this is a really good report. This does seem to indicate that everybody's comfortable generally with how we are operating, that we're doing things in a transparent, procedural, you know, process-oriented way, and people are being given a chance to be heard. So, yeah. Okay. Anything further on this? Heather.
I just want to add that I've always, and Kelly has started doing this too, sort of trying to clear our calendars the morning of the IDA meeting, recognizing that some people don't read their packet until the morning of. So, you know, even those last minute questions, we're usually try and make ourselves available to answer those. If anyone can't sleep at night, the authorizing legislation and all the statutory laws are linked on our website.
And we'll solve that problem.
I know that all of you took the ABO's IDA Public Authorities training when you joined the board, and Greg will be taking that course soon. It's about an hour and a half. And you're always welcome to take it as many times as you want if you need a refresher. And then the New York State Economic Development Council does offer what they call their mini conference, a one-day IDA Academy. They do it once or twice a year throughout the state. And I generally will provide opportunities if anyone wants to go. It's a pretty minimal cost to do that, and representatives from other IDAs, other IDA boards are there, and they always have sessions on some of the statutory things, what's going on in the legislature, and then they might have some best practices around housing or solar or different things that are hot topics.
Okay, and I see Duxon.
So I was curious, the self-evaluation is state mandated, and it's just this scoring. But I'm wondering if we have the ability to augment it with anonymous comments so that, you know, the next time we fill out one of these things, we can offer a little more specificity so that, you know, if we give something a lower rating, the rest of the board has some understanding of what the concern is.
That's a good point. Certainly the submissions are anonymous, but there is no, you know, New York State in its wisdom didn't provide an opportunity for additional comment, and maybe we should try to institute that as a policy here. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Jerry.
Yeah, thanks, Rich. I just, as being fairly new to the board, less than a year now, I just took that training that Heather mentioned, and I found it to be very informative and comprehensive. And just from my short-term perspective, I have to say that I feel very prepared coming into these meetings. I think that the material that we're sent, I think it's even more than, I think it's closer to 2 weeks in advance, gives us the opportunity to really understand what we're going to be talking about at the upcoming meetings. And I do feel very prepared. And both Heather and Kelly have made themselves available to me on a number of occasions to answer questions. So I just wanted to put that plug in.
Thanks. Okay, anybody else? right, let's keep going. Next item we have is our proposed solar policy amendments. And Heather, I think you worked on this?
I did. So I updated a memorandum in your agenda packet, just sort of overviewing my recommendations on the policy. You've seen most of these at previous meetings last year, really moving towards penalizing, or I should put it on the positive, moving towards a policy that promotes solar development in areas that that would preserve farmland and actively farmed land. So, you know, the policy now sort of has a structured payment if a project is on prime ag land or actively farmed land. They would pay a premium per megawatt, a higher amount for community solar projects. And also, we pegged that to something that's widely recognized, the USDA soil survey. So it's pretty easy to go in, and everyone that's in the soil world and the farmland world sort of understands the soil map. So that was the majority there. We also recognized that the TCIDA could take into account if the solar developer is using agrovoltaics, which, you know, are different forms of farming under solar panels, whether it's grazing or growing clover or other kinds of crops that can grow under a solar panel. So the Ag and Farmland Protection Board was going to help me to identify if there's a sort of a best practices around agrovoltaics that we could also put as a companion to our policy on our website for developers that might be interested in some of that. And my recommendation really was we'd like to get the policy in place so that, you know, the next project that comes in the door can be operating under this policy. There was some discussion at the last time we talked about this, about adding a similar kind of graduated payment to help to preserve forest land. And so I've spent some time with Abigail Connor in the County Planning Department, as well as Guillermo Metz, who's sitting behind me from Cooperative Extension, trying to identify if there's, you know, something similar to that USDA soils map. And there really isn't. Like, there honestly is not a common definition of forest land. So, you know, there may be some ways, but I think Abigail and I really erred on the side of let's not create our own wheel in Tompkins County and our own definition. We don't want to make it complicated. And also, it's really more of a land use issue for municipalities, home rule issue. So I'm sort of recommending adopt the policy now. We have some language in there about, you know, our goal to preserve forest land as one of our purposes in this policy, but not having there's really no mechanism, I think, to adequately identify if a project is going on forest land. So that is sort of a recap of my memo in real time. And Rich, you did ask me if I could invite the chair of the Ag and Farmland Protection Board. I'm just going to eat crow. I thought that I knew who the chair was, but I did not. Apparently, he works at Cooperative Extension, Graham. So I emailed Graham and asked him if he would come, and he graciously said he would come, but I realized yesterday that I had not, in fact, invited the chair, but you have two staff here from Cooperative Extension that work very closely with the Ag and Farmland Protection Board.
Yeah, if you want to, just for a few minutes, if you come up, just in case we've got some questions, and we'd like to say thank you for your help. While you're getting up here, Heather, for the benefit of some of the newer IDA members, maybe it makes sense just to talk a little bit about the history of the solar panel abatement process, because New York State really stepped in here and changed it. And part of your memo is talking about how there isn't much incentive in these programs. It's now really just based on certainty, and we don't have a lot of decision-making authority in this area.
Thanks, Rich. When the state first made it available to have community distributed solar built in New York State, the law was passed, no projects happened for about 18 months, and I was one of the first IDAs, me and my counterpart in Livingston County and my counterpart in Sullivan County were starting to talk to solar developers and finding that the finances just didn't really work. So that's why the IDAs really sort of stepped in. There was an issue with the way that the state was assessing value for these projects, and the values were as if they were a building and the value goes up over time. But we all know that a solar panel, much like a wind turbine, degrades over time in its ability to generate electricity. The state wasn't really willing to close that loophole in the tax code, in the assessment code, so that's why the IDAs continued to deliver incentives. So the state has now stepped up and they've put together a statewide valuation model that all the assessors are using. It has been tied up in the courts. It's been challenged. There's a lot of uncertainty about what's going to happen with it. But we're able to have developers go in and we can fill it out and we can see what that valuation and then figure out what the tax payment would be. The past several projects that we've delivered an incentive to, their savings over 25 to 30 years is about $24,000 to $29,000 over 25 to 30 years. So there's not a lot of savings. I think what they're really looking for is certainty. And so that's why I've recommended that we still keep that base $4,200 a megawatt. Those projects, they're paying about what they would pay if they were not under pilot.
Okay, just thanks for the background.
Yeah.
And thank you to our guests for coming in. And I don't know if you want to speak to the policy, but just a couple minutes just to give us your thoughts.
Sure.
And introduce yourselves, please.
Yeah, so I'm going to let John go first here. I'm Graham Savio. I'm the head of the Agriculture Department at Cooperative Extension Tompkins.
And I'm John Fleming. I wasn't at the meeting that you were at. I am the chair of the committee, and I got word that the meeting was happening, so I helped. I'm the chair of the committee. I'm a dairy farmer in Lansing, Walnut Ridge Dairy, and solar, we've been dealing with it for about 4 years now because we rent quite a few acres, so the projects that my farm is having to deal with are not the ones that you guys are looking at a policy for. These are the big ones that ORES is state. So I realize it's a totally different situation, but anything that can be done to penalize the companies from using farmland, if at all possible. I realize it's, it's up to an individual landowner and the developer. They're the ones that are making the deal, and then you guys basically just have to work with it after that. But we definitely appreciate the fact that you took an interest and are trying to do something to avert as much of this from affecting farmland as it can. A lot of these projects aren't necessarily on what is designated by the state as prime farmland, but if it's the land that I'm working, I consider it prime to my business. Affected in this whole.
We don't penalize people. We encourage them or we discourage them.
Okay, Todd, did you have something?
Excuse me, I'm with electricians, so my contractors do a lot of solar work, and I couldn't agree with you more about the farmland. Last thing I want to see is farmland used up for a solar project. I was at a public hearing in Groton about a year and a half ago, and some of the farmers there brought up some great concerns, because there was that CSNG was there, and they were talking about when they leave, so everything's going to be just like it was before. And one of the farmers asked the question, he said, so did you take samples? Do you know how much nitrogen's in the ground? Do you know how much calcium, and naturally they didn't do that. So they called them right out on it and said, so it's not going to be the same as it was before. So they brought up a lot of really good opinions and ideas, a lot of the community people up there in Groton. I was really impressed.
And there'll be another meeting on February 20th.
In Lansing, right? In Lansing or?
That same project.
Lansing or Groton?
In Groton.
In Groton, okay. Yep.
Deborah.
So for a while, I served on the Soil and Water Conservation District Board, and I know that what I learned there is that a lot of the land that's rented by the dairy industry is for spreading manure. Is that still the case?
Well, the goal is to use the nutrients on as many acres as effectively as you can, and there are limits as to how many you can. So one of my concerns with us losing land between these two large projects is we could lose 14% of our acres to those two solar projects.
So my question is, I'm not familiar with what the machinery that spreads that manure looks like, but it would seem to me that if the machinery is not huge and bulky, it would be a fairly good use of the land underneath solar panels to spread manure.
But it's not. The way to do it the most efficiently is called a dragline system. So you're pulling a hose that has the manure in it.
Big bulky machine.
Yeah, and you have to,
Right.
there's a lot of work to get that snake to go where you want it to go. So going up and down between panels just.
Ain't gonna work.
No, so like dairy and, real forage production is not going to happen between those. It's going to be your sheep farming or maybe some vegetables or something. So it's going to be, for the acres we farm, it's going to be a different use as far as the agrivoltaic part of it.
Worth a try.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, go ahead, Graham.
I will say I'm aware of at least one project that's working on developing equipment to inject manure without a drag line, but with a tank. But it's sort of a pilot phase. Who knows if it's going to be widely adopted, but folks are working on it.
It has potential.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
I guess I jump in with a comment for the benefit of the committee members. There was a fair amount of discussion about this issue of forest land, because we don't want developers to avoid farmland and just clear-cut trees. But it was interesting to me that for all of the work done to rate farmland and to grade it and everything else, that just doesn't really exist in any similar way for forest land. And so we're left with language basically saying it's the sort of will of the IDA to avoid cutting down a lot of trees to do solar. And I'm comfortable with that, but I wanted to be clear with everybody. Deborah.
Well, I applaud Heather's reluctance to wade into the what's a forest and what isn't controversy, as it's still fresh in my mind.
Given our inability
what we went through with our forest management plan out of DPS and the disagreements over what was old growth forest and what wasn't. So yeah, I think we just need to be
And I think this language gives good direction to future IDAs on what's intended here. But yeah, Greg.
Sorry, Heather.
Okay.
Either flip a coin.
All right, thanks, Heather. My question was, the 30% is compounding, so it's the base 4,200, then 30%, and then a 30% increase to that number.
Yes.
Right, okay, because it's a difference of about $378 if we do it that way. Just wanted to make sure that's clear.
Yes, it is. I wanted to also add, I call myself a recovering planner. My background is in planning and talking to the planning department. We sort of agreed that this is a land use issue, that the municipalities should have solar laws that have setbacks and areas in their zoning where you can have solar or not have solar. And, that's really the first line of defense, is those municipalities and their land use laws. And we saw in Newfield, after the first solar project went in, they didn't have any zoning, they don't have anything out there. They now have site plan review for solar. So they do have a solar law. And the more that you can provide resources for those municipalities to grapple with some of these issues and put in place rules and regulations that prohibit solar from happening in areas where communities don't want to see it is really the first and best line of defense. As many of you well know, at the IDA, we come in after they've determined where they're going to site their project. They've been through their site plan review. They have their environmental review done. There's been a significant amount of investment in that site. And then the IDA's role really is to look at the financial piece and help to make those projects happen where appropriate. So, you know, the more that we can do through cooperative extension or planning to provide those resources and that information to particularly some of those smaller, more rural communities, I think really benefits.
Yeah. Yes.
That's a great opportunity to plug our upcoming Ag Summit, which is actually going to focus on solar development and how it relates to farmland. So that'll be March 26th, and we're actually focusing this year on municipalities. So we'll get that link to someone who would be appropriate to get that to.
Yes, and I'm going to be speaking there about the
and Heather
IDA
will
solar
be one
policy.
of the speakers educating municipalities about how to approach these things. And Guillermo Metz is our ag solar expert at Cooperative Extension, and he's helping arrange the whole thing.
And I think I'm going to bring my counterpart from Cayuga County, who also has a very similar policy.
Excellent. Yeah, it's really exciting to be a part of this conversation around these really innovative and forward-thinking policies. It's really cool. Thank you.
This can be a local meeting?
Yeah, it'll be in Groton.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, further discussion. Well, thank you guys for coming in. I really appreciate your expertise. We have a policy before us. I guess I'd ask the question, are there further comments or questions about the policy as proposed? Jeff?
I'm ready to move it.
Okay, moved. Anybody second? Oh, well, let's get on the table. Can I get a second?
Yeah.
Deborah seconds? Todd?
I just want to ask her, guess again, so are you good with the way this is written up then? With that policy, you feel good about it as far as protecting the farmland, or?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's a huge amount of control you have, because if you try to get the numbers too big, you're just going to turn them off, and they're probably just going to pay the regular tax, and they're still going to be there. So it just puts, you know, it shows that you don't want it there, but the money is what's going to drive it, unfortunately. So, yeah, I don't know as though you can do anything more.
Well, there can be land use controls, but perhaps. But I feel that it is important that we state what we want our policy to be. But Graham, did you have something further?
Yeah, and I would just note that it is pretty well aligned with what we see from Lewis County, who've been working on this for a long time. So, you know, this brings it up to around the 7,000, 7,200 mark, and they found that 7,200 was something that developers didn't balk at. They didn't walk away. So bringing it up, it helps guide their decision making, we hope. So, yeah, thank you again for putting it in.
Okay, Deborah.
I wonder too, what impact the changing federal landscape will have on the number of developers who
Is there something going on in Washington?
Oh, I don't know. I get the feeling that there is.
Today it might be.
Sorry.
Can I make one more comment?
Yes, sure. Please.
Just in terms of, this money where does this money go once they pay it?
It goes into the tax revenue of the municipalities involved.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not allocated anywhere particular.
We don't take it and go on vacation.
Right. Now, at some point, it would be nice if, whether it's through a host, community host program or something, that if some of that funding could eventually go back to a farm that was affected by the fact that they just lost some, it's not large acreages on these projects, but.
Certainly talking to town boards and the county legislature towards budget time, if there's significant revenue coming in from these types of projects, emphasizing the importance of ag and farmland protection is a good argument to make. Yeah. Heather?
I would just add on those utility scale projects, the big one that's contemplated in the town of Groton and Lansing, get in touch with the towns because those projects are required to negotiate an HCA with the municipalities. So I know that that's ongoing, and maybe there's some ability to get some compensation through there.
Todd?
Rich, I know with the Enfield Solar project, we had some, I think it was the town supervisor came to the meeting and some other people, and they had some concerns. And I remember voting against it, excuse me, because we didn't have the support of the town supervisor and the people there in the town of Enfield. Do we have any protections in here for the municipalities where they get some kind of say in it? It stinks to approve something that's going to be in someone else's backyard. And then they might not be for it.
The history on there is a little bit more nuanced, I think, because we had requested a letter of support, and they provided that, but then they said, except that we want them to negotiate a community host agreement. And we said, well, they can do that, but that's a separate matter. That's between you and the solar provider. The solar provider then said, well, no, we're not going to do that. And so then they came back to us and said, well, why did you approve this? And I'm concerned in those circumstances of a slippery slope, that what we do on our incentives is we do the incentives across the affected municipalities, and we don't favor one municipality more than another. So for example, there have been arguments saying, well, you shouldn't abate any school taxes because schools are important. And it's like, well, they are important, but so are all the other governmental functions. And if you start down that slippery slope of trying to reduce some of the incentives on some of the taxing municipalities, but not others, so that they're on different schedules of percentages or whatever else, pretty soon you argue yourself out of any incentive at all, is my fear. And that's what we were headed towards in Enfield. And we said, no, we have to have a consistent policy that everybody understands in every project. And if we start down that pathway, we're going to create tremendous trouble and probably be very ineffective.
Could we have something in there? Could we have something in there where the developer and the municipality have to agree on something before it comes to us? Some kind of would that put pressure on them to?
Well, we continue to ask for a letter of support from the municipality.
Okay.
So that would be the trigger. I think in that instance in Enfield, the timing didn't work really well because they told us, yeah, we support it. And then they were like, wait, okay. Later. Heather, is my recollection correct there?
Yes, and there have been some other solar projects where some of the taxing jurisdictions did come in and were not supportive of the projects, and this body, I think this was before you, even this body decided that it was to go ahead and approve the projects because they provide the renewable benefits to the communities. Those two projects in the town of Dryden, I think together are the largest taxpayer, even under pilot with their solar projects.
So we got protection there with that letter of support then?
Yeah, I mean,
Yep. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, you've had taxing jurisdictions asked to change the split so that the towns get more. When the town of Enfield did ask about requiring a host community agreement, in talking to our council, they really discouraged us from requiring or negotiating any sort of host community agreement on behalf of a municipality because, and Russ, chime in if I'm getting this wrong, because it could be construed as a pilot payment and then the other taxing jurisdictions would want a piece of it, and that's not the purpose of what the IDA wanted to do.
Thank you.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
Okay. Further comment? Are we ready to vote on adopting the revised solar policy? Looks like we are. I'll call the roll. Duxon?
Yes.
Deborah?
Yes.
Jeff?
Yes.
Greg?
Yes.
Todd?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. And Jerry, again, if you had any opinion you wanted to express, you can certainly do so. Okay. Well, that is adopted, and thank you for your work on that. Let's see, that gets us through item 4, business. I do have some items for chair's report. One is I wanted to just apprise the IDA that there's a resolution that went through the Housing and Economic Development Committee to request New York State to consider a local law to change the number of IDA members from 7 to 9. And the purpose of that would be to allow the IDA to include a member of a school district. And Greg, maybe you want to speak to that since you did the revised resolution that was actually adopted.
Sure. Yeah. There was initial language that required a member of the school board. This resolution listed a number of I don't want to say affinity groups. I got my Cornell hat on there for a second. Professional representation or community representation from a number of different sectors, listed that out, but did call special note and special attention that it's the intent of the legislature to make sure that the school district voice is represented along with organized labor as well. I know we had previous legislation that we passed that spelled some things out about, seats and organized labor having a seat, et cetera. This was just to further reinforce that and to complement that. It doesn't specify Ithaca City School District, Groton, Dryden. It just says, a member of a Tompkins County school district representative. It doesn't say school board member. It doesn't say school administrator. It doesn't say teachers union, but someone who represents collectively the interest of a district in the county is the spirit of the resolution.
Yeah. And I attended the HED meeting and spoke at the meeting. I'm not a voting member of the committee. Deborah, you are, and Greg. And I raised some concerns, frankly, in that I want to make sure that we are broadly representative, but in some sense, I think that we are. We certainly look out for the interests of taxpayers and governments and trying to spur economic development. Where I think it's really important is that we're working along from the same basic state of facts. And my concern is that there have been consistent messages from people supportive of this initiative saying that the IDA has undermined school districts. And I don't believe that to be the case, that we have actually benefited school districts and benefited them in really substantial ways by the work of the IDA and the incentives offered. I don't need to review with any of you how a tax incentive works, but that you don't abate existing taxes, you're just phasing in the new taxes. And by doing that, you allow projects to be financially viable. And if a project is not financially viable, it won't get built. And you get no benefits, whether in terms of tax base, in terms of jobs, energy efficiency, use of local labor, anything else. And I worry that we don't want to introduce a voice that is basing their judgment on information that is just demonstrably untrue. With that said, I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with going to 9. It would give us a chance to have more membership. There's a little bit more logistics, but that's, I think, pretty livable. Where I think the county needs to be really careful is that in selecting members, that they make sure the people that they're selecting truly do understand the math that is done to evaluate projects and to support them, and that it does not undermine any governmental entity. I'll stop talking, but that's probably coming. given the vote at HED, I think it's going to pass at the legislature too. It'll go to New York State and be structured as a local law and come back here. Deborah and then Duxon.
Yeah, allow me to be uncharacteristically optimistic.
That's today's date.
Given the widely held perception in the education community about how this all works, and given what seems to be an obvious attitude of victimization among that community, I think that perhaps expanding the IDA and including a representative from the school communities would address both of those issues, or could address both of those issues in a positive way. People, they would feel that they were represented, which always helps. And I think the experience of serving on this board would provide a different perspective and an education as to how this really works and how in many ways this actually helps schools. I know from personal experience, my perception of the IDA changed pretty drastically when I was appointed to this board. So, and if I can change, anyone can.
Duxon.
Recognizing that there are still many steps to make this happen, so there's time to think about this. I'm just curious if HED discussed how, for me, for example, the mayor usually recommends themselves or someone to the IDA, and then the legislature affirms it. In the case of there's multiple school districts in Tompkins County, and as you all just said, there are multiple ways to present school district representation. So was there any discussion about the selection process?
Greg.
Yeah, there was not specific conversation on the selection process at HED, but I would venture out on a limb and say that some of the thought process and conversation around that issue has been an application, a process to review. Obviously, appointments are by the chair and confirmed by the legislature for a number of the seats outside of, I think, IAED seat, which is recommended by their executive board. So I think it would be an application to see who and what, and then allow the chair of the legislature or some designated, review committee to make a recommendation on who the most qualified to serve is. Would be my response to that, and then I do have a follow-up comment.
Yeah, I guess I'd comment on your comment, which is that I think an interview would be a really good idea, just to have a conversation with whoever's proposed to make sure that they're not advocating an ideology rather than understanding what we actually do. Yeah. But you have further comment.
Yeah, I think I think a little bit with along Deborah's line of thinking as it relates to bringing someone into the fold, and I think there's also a possibility that maybe having more closer connectivity to this function could also help the school board plan, school districts plan for growth and development, et cetera. Because I think if you've seen some of the growth that we've seen over the last decade in our community, I'm not really sure that the school district is even really keeping up with, in many cases, some of that growth that may be needed, and maybe why they find themselves in a position where they are in currently. So I think a lot more good can come from this, and I don't think we need to be exclusionary in this process, and should be exclusionary. And we shouldn't also be looking just for folks to rubber stamp things, right? This should be a very well thought out, dialogued board that really gets to what's best for our community. So I know that there's been some negative comments back and forth, but from my standpoint, as it relates to the Housing Economic Development Committee and my support of that resolution, was to really create a better community, create a better community dialogue, and hopefully inclusion of more perspectives will get us to that point while still advancing economic development and growth in our community where appropriate.
Yeah, and I might support the resolution. I didn't vote at HED, but I did want to be very clear on my concerns, which are real in my mind. But we'll see where all that goes. But just want to make sure the IDA was up to speed on what might be happening. Further comment? Okay. The other item I wanted to put out on the floor for some discussion is we got some emails regarding our local labor policy, and particularly the practices of contractors in considering bids that I will paraphrase what I think happened, but the upshot is I think we do need to go back to the Labor Committee and really have an analysis of our policy and see if we do want to change anything or not. But the complaint was that bids were submitted on a project. There was a local labor bid, but it was more than 10% higher, my understanding, than the low bidder, so that the contractor wanted to accept the low bid, and the local contractor said, no, you really should negotiate with us. And the contractor said, I don't have any requirement to do that, and I think that is in accordance with our policy. We don't have any language on requiring further negotiation. And that's where I think we should have some discussion and consideration of our committee, from our committee, and bring it back to the full IDA. So we're thinking about this issue and this question. But I'd open it up for discussion.
I would just add, Rich,
Yep.
in this instance, the project was approved and is under the old policy, which just requires that you solicit bids from local contractors.
Right.
However, Kelly and I did meet with the union representatives when they reached out with us to talk about it, and did reach out to the general contractor. The general contractor indicated that they had already, the bids were submitted in October. It wasn't until December that the contractor and the union reached out and wanted to negotiate on their price. And the general contractor had already chosen who they were going to work with, and were already opening up the scope and negotiating with the one that they'd selected. So they were already in that negotiation process and had already sort of locked in. I can't remember the terminology that they used. It was, it's not my bailiwick, the construction terminology, but they had, said, okay, here's who we're going with, and we're moving forward.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's some reasonable concern about projects have to happen and they have to be able to make decisions, but we do want to encourage local labor, so that's the discussion. Yeah, Todd.
Yeah, that gentleman called me too, because he was telling me how he spent, the amount of hours he spent doing, working with them, working on the bid and then working on a budget with them. So he spent a lot of time with them. He thought he had the job. He's working out like I said, doing the budget numbers with them. And then he said, dead silence came out, and that's when he was shocked. What's going on? Did I get this job or not? And yeah, he was pretty shocked. That communications dropped off, and so he was just worried that like his opinion was like in any future jobs they have, he's not going to bid because the amount of time he put into it for the bid, and then it's like they're just using his numbers to get prices from somebody else. So that's how he felt. And that's why,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, at any rate, with the committees for 2025, our Construction Labor Committee would take it up, and we would try to get input from union reps, developers, and business owners, and report back to the whole IDA on whether we want to do any changes to our local labor policy as a result. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, all right. That was my chair's report. Staff report.
We do have a staff report today. The first item is in your packet on page 55, the quarter 4 financial report. You'll see the starting balance as of 2024, and the difference between the percentage of budget on the fees from projects. A couple of items to note, that City Harbor didn't close, Cliff Street didn't close. So that's the difference between the budgeted and the year-to-date column. Conifer did close at the end of December, but the check was received in December, or in January.
Which one is Conifer?
That was the renegotiated pilot for
For
30,
West Hill.
25 years on West Hill.
Okay.
So that was a $5,000 payment. Under the expenses column, the wayfinding project, they did submit an additional request in late December, and the check was sent out for that in January.
Okay. Any questions or comments on the fourth quarter financial report? Okay.
Okay, moving on. Ina will be connecting with all of you on the annual financial disclosure. Those are due in May, so you've got some time. And then she may have gotten some oath of office cards to some of you today. If you're not here, she'll connect with you at the next meeting or when you're available. Heather and I just got back today from Albany at the New York State Economic Development Council, and one of the items that we were updated on, in addition to other updates on programs and policies, is that Camoin Associates is conducting an IDA survey, and they received results from 43 IDAs across the state. So once that is compiled and released, we'll be sure to share that with everyone to get some data about what's going on across all of New York. So that's it for me.
Yeah, I will just add, I do sit on the board at the New York State Economic Development Council, so we did review the final report, and this is the second time that the consultant has done this, really in an effort to augment the data that a lot of the newspapers and the press pick up around the Paris system. Paris is antiquated. That's our state reporting system for all IDA projects. So what our Economic Development Council has done is hired a consultant that comes in and asks IDAs specifically for information. They sort of compare that with what's in Paris, but then they try and better quantify the economic benefits to communities. And some of the data in there is around housing units and affordable housing units, downtown projects, community revitalization, solar, megawatts of solar. Get information out to the public about the benefits of IDAs across the state and better understanding. So I'm going to be happy to have Kelly share that when it comes out, which should be in the next 2 or 3 weeks.
Okay. I had a question. Heather, we'd had a brief conversation, and I was saying that it's been almost a decade, if not a decade, since we did a housing needs assessment at the county. And you had mentioned you thought perhaps a demand study might be a more effective tool for us to understand what's happening with housing in our community. Could you just talk a little bit about what would be the difference between the two?
Sure. I would say a market study or a demand study that's really going to quantify what the supply is and how many units short we are. The needs assessment, I think, has a lot of data about what kind of housing we have, but there isn't really a model in it that identifies how many units we need. The county does establish, we think this many units, but there are there are consultants that can do more modeling to come up with some, concrete numbers. And I think, part of what the county does in their housing needs assessment, which is valuable, is they really focus on the affordable housing numbers, but not the rest of the market. So, if you do a demand study, you're going to identify at every price point and every level where there is a lack of supply or excess supply.
So it will slice and dice by, affordable workforce market rate?
You could.
Well, I mean, I think that's essential,
Yeah.
because just simply providing more housing, as many projects have done, does not seem to have addressed the shortage of affordable and workforce housing.
Well, we know, those of us that have been working in the housing space for a long time, we know there's not enough housing units in this community. And that tends to drive prices. And I don't think I'm wrong in saying that. I mean, there's a lot of people that have been saying that for a very long time. So, there are those that might say, oh, it's just more data. Do we need more data? But, it's nice to have the data. I recognize that the county planning department has limited budget. I recognize that they probably already have their work plan identified for the year, and I want to be conscious of Katie and her team and their workload as well.
And I raised this at a committee meeting just this past week. So, yes, and that was exactly the response I got was, well, I'm wondering how much ballpark would a demand study cost? And I'm thinking, Greg, that maybe this is something that there could be a split between the county and the IDA so we could share the information.
I have no idea, but I could certainly ask a couple of consultants to give a range.
Okay, and just
Could the chamber help us out with this? I know in the past they did some studying.
That might be a good ask as well. But just to make sure I'm not wandering off into the wilderness, does this make sense to the other committee members? I don't feel
It completely does, and I think, based on our discussions last month, when have we hit that market rate housing? So it would be great to have something like that.
Yeah, Greg?
Yeah, Heather, would any of the work that the chamber had, some of those subgroups or working groups, would any of that overlay into this or no? Not really?
Probably not.
Okay.
I mean, there's some basic data out there, but more concrete or complex data probably doesn't exist. And you might want to think about having the city as a partner as well. We've seen some significant housing growth in the city that they might want to partner. I don't want to put Duxon on the spot there.
My concern, Rich, with just studying is we've studied and we have a need and we've had 10 years that have gone by and we haven't been able to fully meet our need. So what does spending $20, $30, $40, $50, $100,000 to restate the problem, but said differently, going to do, as opposed to an actual plan of, gosh, how the heck are we going to build these units for the missing middle and make truly affordable housing at every level of the spectrum? That's where I would prefer to focus rather than saying, here's the housing shortage that we have. I mean, you ask any appraiser, real estate attorney, developer, we have a housing problem. Ask anybody who's looking for housing, we have a housing problem. So I'm not sure like what formally restating the problem is going to do if we don't actually have a formalized plan to accompany such a document, because we did a housing study 10 years ago, and when we got an update on our progress, we haven't made that much, even with all the development we've had.
We've added a lot of housing, and I don't think
it's still not affordable.
Right.
We've added none in some of the categories we needed.
But somebody was saying, well, we have a housing crisis, and I said, I don't think that's true. I think we have a housing crisis in that you've got different categories of housing for people with very different needs. And for example, supportive housing, senior housing, there are niche areas where I'm not sure. I'd like to know how far behind we are in each of these categories, and I don't know. And we're making major financial commitments from the IDA on information that's pretty old now. Yeah, we'd need a plan, but how do you make a plan with 10-year-old information? We can kind of assess and go, but I'd feel much more comfortable if we had current data. And particularly because one of the arguments I heard when I went and talked to representatives from the Ithaca City School District is we should not have approved Southworks because it was approving a lot of new housing. And that was a voice that was very different from I've heard from every other direction. And, if they're right, then we need to consider that. But if they're not right, I think it would be very helpful to have good data to say, no, we're not meeting the needs in our community, and here it is. Deborah.
Yeah, but I think we all know that we're not meeting the needs in our community. And another point, before I get to Greg's plan, is, I think several years ago, Heather actually put together a presentation that demonstrated that IDA incentives are not the answer to the affordable housing problem. Which, hats off to you, Heather. I've never forgotten that, and it totally changed my view of the IDA. But my question for you, Greg, and it's a challenge for all of us, how do we plan to provide something that we are so dependent on private developers to provide? That's our challenge. All we can do, to some extent, is state we have needs. These are where they are. But, unless we're building housing ourselves, how do we meet that need? How do we plan for that?
Yeah. And, well, let me get Jerry in here, and then Greg.
Yeah, thanks, Rich. I want to go back to that chamber task force work that was done a few years ago that spent some time. I was on that group, and it sort of was it spent some time trying to identify some more specific, specific areas. So there was an advocacy group. There was a group that was going to look out, supposed to identify developable land. There was a financing group. There was, and even we were trying to try to define some of these groups that we're talking about. What is workforce housing? What is the income of a person in workforce housing? Because there are so many. We all understand market rate is top of the line, but everything below that was never really had some defined parameters. So we spent some time on that. I don't think that was wasted time, and I do think some good work product came out of it. We might want to circle back on that. And I do have to agree with what Deborah's trying to get at, and what people are saying is we've really to Greg's point. We had done study after study after study, but we seem to never move off. We're just spending so much time studying stuff, and until we get the kind of collaboration that we need, because there's no silver bullet, there's no one group that steps in and solves this problem. We need a much more collaborative effort to get this problem solved. And that's just my look at it from a number of years of having spent time on various groups who've discussed this. We don't move off the mark because we don't get the collaboration that's required to make it happen.
Greg.
Yeah, and Jerry, thanks for your comments as well. I do think some of the things to Deborah's question could be, and some of those answers could be found in some of that chamber working group product in terms of barriers, right? Cost of infrastructure, wastewater treatment, sewer, the electric grid,
tariffs,
land banking, right? I think, putting parcels together, having the entitlements process expedited for specific parcels. I mean, we could build a robust list, but we'd have to get all jurisdictions on board, or just the ones that want to participate, right? Maybe it's Dryden, maybe it's Lansing, maybe it's Newfield, who knows? But I think there is a way to do it. We just have never done it, because what it would mean is making an investment in a public good and partnering with a private entity. And there's a big sentiment in our community that that's a bad thing, but that's actually how stuff gets done, right? Because we can't be the sole provider as a public entity for everything good in our community. We need to have private investment. Hopefully I said that right. So I think it's important that we look to what can we be doing to move the ball. And understanding the problem is, yes, one piece of it, but I think we know some solutions, but we're kind of at a failure to launch for probably, I would say, the better part of 20 years in really making an impact on, because I'm a little bit shy on rental units currently, and I think the path forward for the county needs to be a strong focus on affordable, at every income level, for sale housing that actually helps create and generate wealth within our community for individuals personally to grow their financial position. You know, there's some condo laws and things like that at New York State that need to be revised and advocated for change at. So I think there's a number of things that we can do. I just think we've sort of sat on our hands collectively as a community to not take the bold steps and just take the convenient ones and not have to defend the need for public-private partnership.
Heather.
Amen.
I agree with you. I do want to say the county was very bold in creating the Community Housing Development Fund, and it has done some tremendous work to help to get some affordable housing in there. And, you know, Martha Robertson and Annie Corman have put a lot of time and effort, and the county planning department has too. Yes. One piece. But we need to do that in other areas. I did want to mention something that I have mentioned to Jeff and to Rich. At the IDA, we have not required a market study for an individual housing project or community revitalization kind of project in the past, because we have had housing needs assessments that, you know, we have a sense that there's need. And the city really wanted to see some more vibrancy and density downtown. And so that's part of why the IDA really started delivering incentives for housing. There have been some indicators that there might be some softening in the market, particularly on the higher end side. And is it a blip? Is it going to continue? Like, there's a lot of unknown at this point in time. The IDA's policies say you can require additional information, additional studies at the cost of the applicant. If there were another housing project to come in that was market, like an above market project, Kelly would be recommending that this body require a market study for that project. And I think that might be good practice, at least for the next year or two, as, you know, we sort of see our way through what's going on with the market. And, you know, there's a lot of variables that could change in the next couple of years.
Okay, Deborah.
Yeah, I just want to bring to everyone's attention another issue that is going to be a challenge, which is that in some parts of the county, we can't get beyond a very limited number of sewer connections. So infrastructure is another issue here.
Huge.
Yeah, there have been some really nice conversations across borders of water and sewer purveyors lately about increasing capacity. The village of Cuba Heights, I think, did get some grant money, or at least applied to do some bypass work. There's been some conversations.
There have been conversations, but there has been precious little progress.
Okay, so if I can summarize, my question was, what about a demand study? It sounds like there is not support for that there seems to be consensus that the housing needs continue to exist across all types of housing. at least to the point that we feel comfortable proceeding with a pro-housing policy in general and trying to develop a plan on that basis, except for perhaps full market rate, where we would want a market study going forward. Is that a fair summary, Jeff?
I'm sorry, I missed the first. Did you say you felt like there wasn't support at our level that we would want to,
Demand study.
I would certainly vote for a demand study.
Yeah, I mean, I think
I think it's important.
I would feel more
all
comfortable
levels.
making decisions on housing with current good information that we felt comfortable and we could rely on, but that is not what I heard from the IDA. And I just, Jerry.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Rich. I didn't mean to imply that a demand study was a bad idea. I think that is it may be a good starting point. It's not something that we've done in a while, or if ever. I'm not, I would support that.
Okay, Duxon.
I'd also be, willing to do a study. I think we can both move forward and try to gain as much understanding of the current market as possible.
Okay. Well, again, it sounds like we're ambivalent, but maybe it would make sense to just get a sense of cost. What would it cost for a demand study? And we can pick it up next month.
Okay.
So thanks. That turned into quite a discussion. Anything further on staff report?
I know that Kelly did send the public meeting for the Yellow Barn Solar Project. It is, I think, February 20th in the evening at the Groton High School. This is a 160 megawatt project that straddles the town of Lansing and the town of Groton. It is going through the state's permitting and siting and approval process. They have received their draft permit and it's under review and comment for 60 days. The draft was issued December 20th-ish, maybe the 18th. So there's 60 days. Part of that process, they do have to have a public meeting. So I would encourage anyone, if you're interested, I do have a link to the state site with tomes of documents, but they likely will be coming to the IDA. We've started gathering some data about other utility scale projects and host community agreements and sort of where they're landing these days, and have started to talk to the towns a little bit about what they're doing and what they're thinking. So if anyone wants a primer and you're available, I think it would be good to be there.
Yeah, no, I think that's something worth trying to attend. Yeah, Todd.
Yeah, I plan on being at that meeting too. So this one developer is the same one I was talking about before, CS Energy, which is like they're engaged in legal lawsuits right now with one of my contractors who's they're in debt to $2 million. I mean, it's just they don't. Most likely, whoever does the work for them is going to be out of town. It's going to be out of town company with out of town workforce because they haven't been burned by them yet. I would strongly recommend if we do any solar projects we do, that we adopt that Prompt Payment Act. And not just solar, I'd say any projects, that we adopt the Prompt Payment Act, anything with an application, because what that does is, at every phase along, they set the phase and the milestones on the jobs. And then when they reach those milestones, that's when they pay the subs money for the parts that are completed. And that way everybody gets paid timely. And the Prompt Payment Act has in there, after those milestones, you get 14 days to pay your subs and your vendors. This is substantial. I really think we need to have something like this to keep bad actors, to keep them honest, to keep them doing business right, and not hurting the contractors that are employing our local people. We really got to do something. A job this size would be huge. They could put several contractors out of business because the contractors sign on to these projects. They got liquidated damages, all kinds of stuff that they're subjected to whether they're getting paid or not by the developer, they got to meet these. And if they don't, they could be legally responsible for holding up the job and all kinds of fines and liquidated damages. So they go out and get extensions on their line of credits so they could take care of their workers, they could take care of their benefits, they can, they pay the bills, pay the vendors, because they got relationships they want to keep. And so they really go into a hole fast when they're basically funding these developers' jobs that act like this. I really think we need to do something to protect the people that hire people from our community. I really do.
Thanks, Todd. Okay. All right. Anything further from staff? I'd like to go backwards for a second to Chair's report, because I wanted you all to know I went for a walk yesterday. And yeah. And I walked by the building that the shared commercial kitchen is in, and the door was ajar. So being a nosy person, I walked in. And there was a carpenter there building workstations. So it was pretty cool. There's things happening. And I continued walking past the farmer's market, where there's a lot of work going on. There's all the concrete work for the new light poles. So there's a whole new lighting system that'll be in the parking area. Floorboards were dug up to do new sewer lines into the bathrooms in the market. And there's a tremendous amount of gravel in the going in the parking area to improve how the parking lot works. So things are happening on those two projects that we helped fund. It was pretty exciting. So I'll go back to the regular order, which is minutes approval. We have minutes from January 8th and January 22nd, 2025. And could I get a motion on both of them? Deborah moves, Todd seconds. Questions or comments on the minutes? Ready to vote? Duxon?
Yes.
Deborah?
Yes.
Jeff?
Yes.
Greg?
Yes.
Todd?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. Okay. Is there any other business to come before the IDA? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn. Todd moves, Deborah seconds. All those in favor, I'll take a vote of hands on that. Great. We are adjourned. Now I'd like to call to order the meeting of the Tompkins County Development Corporation for February 12th, 2025. Welcome, everybody. We had privilege of the floor, but if there's anybody who wishes to address the Development Corporation, seeing none. Any additions to the agenda? I'm not aware of any. Business 2025 officer and committee appointments. And two of the committees apply to both, and two of them are IDA only. So Governance and Finance and Audit Committee, I have proposed to have the same people sit on both, and you all agreed, so thank you. And we need to adopt that. So can I get a motion? Jeff moves, Todd seconds. Discussion? Ready to vote? Duxon?
Yes.
Deborah?
Yes.
Jeff?
Yes.
Greg?
Yes.
Todd?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. Right? No other business coming before the Development Corporation. I have no chair's report. Staff report.
Staff report will be fairly brief. We just have the fourth quarter financial report. You can see the starting balance, fees from projects. We received the bond admin fee from Cayuga Medical Center, and the funds were dispersed for the shared commercial kitchen. Block 14, they do still have some funds outstanding to request, and that's it.
Do we have any update on where Block 14 stands? What they're up to?
I have not heard anything recently.
Not since they were here to give an update in November or December, I haven't heard.
Was it December?
I heard from Gary in November.
Okay, nobody's come and talked to us
No,
in quite a
you're right.
while, though.
I talked to Gary in November. I haven't heard from him since.
Would that be of interest to committee members to get an update on where we stand, since we've committed some real money here? Yes? So, yeah, maybe we can see if they can come in and tell us what they're doing.
Sure.
Right,
And
questions?
just as a reminder, we did agree to disperse those funds in 3 tranches of $30,000 each. So the first $30,000 went out, and for them to request the second $30,000, they do need to provide a report. So you will get those along the way as well.
Okay. All right, questions or comments on the financial report? All right. And I don't believe we need to accept this, right? It is what it is. Anything else from staff?
No.
Okay. I have minutes from January 8th, 2025. Could I get a motion on the minutes? Todd moves, Jeff seconds. Questions or comments? Ready to vote? Duxon?
Yes.
Deborah?
Yes?
Jeff?
Yes.
Greg?
Yes.
Todd?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. Okay, so those are approved. Any other business to come before the Development Corporation this month? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn. Jeff moves, Todd seconds. Show of hands. All right, we're adjourned. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you in a month.
Thank you.